Our first speaker is Arnab Das, and he will be speaking on understanding Canada literary production as means of decolonizing.
The name of my paper is Understanding Canada Literary Production as Means of Decolonizing. The paper aims to understand how literary producers of the vast geopolitical space named Canada have used literary productions as means of decolonizing across cultures and time. The paper explores the idea of using indigenizing narrative elements in interactive fictions that paves the way for decolonizing minds. The colonizers supported capitalist economy has encouraged a disconnection of the indigenous population from the land, the language, and the culture. The colonizers supported publishing industry rejected the performance and narration of the indigenous people's oral knowledge systems. Colonizers left no stone unturned to alienate an indigenous soul from his or her own language and culture by introducing residential school systems. Nonetheless, indigenous people began writing in the colonizers' language and experimenting with genres that they had adopted from their multiple interactions with the colonizers' literary system. Writers like Janet Armstrong and Leigh Markle have demonstrated how writing may be used as a tool for decolonization. Digital storytelling has consistently been among the fastest disseminating narrative formats. Interactive fiction is one of the most often used types of digital storytelling. Interactive fiction draws in a lot of readers from all around the world and encourages them to experience a literary work in addition to reading it. Because interactive fictions are ludic in nature, literary creators and distributors sometimes refer to them as games or literary games. The act of designating those literary works as games has a direct bearing on the distribution and publishing politics of digital content. Any literary work that is marketed as a game will draw in more readers. Users searching for games will, in a sense, also pursue those literary works. When it comes to interactive fiction, reading has been substituted by experiencing. Since the text's multimodality allows the author to combine many modalities such as auditory, visual, interactive, navigation, etc. Collaborative authoring makes such literary works conceivable in their multimodal form. Contributors with varying expertise can collaborate in real time on the same literary work in this type of collaborative authoring. Collaborative authorship has a significant impact on the publication and distribution of born digital literary works in addition to its function in this. The collaborators handle publishing through digital platforms since they possess the necessary knowledge and expertise for that particular platform. The information created by the technological professionals and optimized for search engines is what allows such born digital literary masterpieces to reach a wide audience. The method of publishing literary works in a born digital culture differs greatly from that of a publishing in print culture. The primary distinction is the notion of screening of a work before it gets published. Digital publishing does not necessitate the screening process that print publishing does, and the distribution of literary works in digital culture is primarily determined by the reviews and suggestions that are received on the digital platform. Positive reviews frequently have a favorable effect on the search engine optimization. The distribution censorship and the drawback of being unable to monitor the quality of those literary products. A reader of a literary work must pay attention to all the modes included in a work in order to fully experience it. Otherwise, they will not be able to read the text on a page, screen, or view a picture that corresponds with the text. These occurs as a result of the literary works, many modes complementing one another and producing meaning during the reading process. As the reader is given less freedom to think on their own, the audio and the visual modes connected to texts on screen have the ability to stimulate the reader's imagination. The immersive sensations provided by those writings may be also viewed as having an effect on the reader's imagination. Reader reads texts on screen along with the audio and the visual aids and also interacts with the text. This process of reading impacts the degree of imagination of the reader. Receiving of a text differs from reader to reader as the socio-economical, political location of readers can be different. Readers reads and understands a text from his or her location. Due to the presence of the several modes in the bond detailed interactive fiction, there are high chances that the reader might get the intended meaning of literary producers. So, this form of detailed storytelling is one of the very popular ways to narrate the story of the others, whose stories are not widely told or fail to reach a large number of readers. It can be seen that interactive games adapted from Nappy Legends, where stories about Nappy, a trickster, has been told by Willy Whitefeathers. Twine has been used as a digital platform to produce this interactive fiction, and this interactive fiction has been created based on HTML5. Twine is one such digital platform which does not demand a high level of technological expertise from either the user or the author. Instead, it creates the bond digital literary work using the author's minimal inputs. The author of this bond digital interactive fiction is named as MKA1. Here, it can be said that the digital platform has, in a way, become a part of the collaborative authorship. Willy Whitefathers is from Kainai, which is one of the three nations comprising the Blackfoot Confederacy. Kainai tribe is also known as the Blood tribe or Kainawa. The Kainai nation is located in Alberta and is surrounded by three rivers on all sides, and the rivers are Old Man, St. Mary, and Belly rivers. Kainai people relied on the tradition of bison hunting culture, and they also used to hunt deer, moose, mountain sheep, etc. Women from Kainai were involved in berry picking and also collected various vegetables for food. They were dependent on animal hunting for food, shelter, clothing, etc. So it can be said that reading stories about Blackfoot legends must have a deep connection with indigenous practices of Canada. It can be also said that those interactive fictions craftfully provide the idea about daily life, occupation, and relationship of indigenous people with nature and the then Canada. For providing a more authentic way of narration, words from language used by Blackfoot people have been used in the interactive fiction named Trickster Traditions, Nappy's Proposal. One can find words like Nityois, Saksatkiman, Ninavakki, etc. These words usually provide a sense of alienation to the reader when the reader first encounters these words from the language of Kainai, but as this is in an interactive fiction, it has the ability to hide a word within a word, and the end user or the reader can access the closest English synonyms of these words just by tapping on those words. Like Nityois appears as tippies after tapping on the word once. The interactive fictions in this series contain vivid descriptions about relationship of indigenous people with nature. So, those interactive narrations can be said to be focused on the idea of ecological relationships that exist in the several regions of Canada. Reading those interactive fictions from India can be seen as one of the most interesting acts. Readers from India can be said to be have a form of narration through which they not only learn about the relationships existing between a particular group of indigenous people of Canada and nature, but also get a chance to experience it because of the multimodal nature of those texts. When readers are affected by colonial hangover, they will fail to connect to the text, especially if they do not experience it in a multimodal form of narration. Performativity present in the form of ludic nature makes detailed storytelling resembling literary production of oral culture. This helps the born digital literary products to have a process of decolonization. From those above discussions, one can find out how reading interactive fictions like Trickster Tradition Snappy's Proposal, Trickster Tradition Nappy's Greatest Achievement, and Trickster Tradition's Nappy and the Rock can be a way to explore how writing in digital space as means of literary production becomes a way to decolonize minds. Thank you.
Thank you, Arnab, for presenting such a very new topic, which is absolutely very new for me, where I guess everyone will have curiosities and more questions, but we can take that after the academic session. Next, me move over to Subham Bhowmik, who will be speaking on retracing the roots, turning to nature for wisdom and learning.
Good afternoon, everyone. The name of my paper is Retracing the Roots, Turning to Nature for Wisdom and Learning. When it comes to the climate crisis in Canada, one can say that colonialism is largely responsible for accelerating the whole process. This colonial intervention also distanced the indigenous people from their natural homes, both geographically and culturally. The lands that the First Nations people once called home were methodically confiscated from them. Some of these lands held immense cultural and religious value. It is also important to mention the impact of policies like the residential school system, which took their children away from their homes and culturally alienated them from their respective communities. Some of these children never returned home. Apparently, the goal of this system was to create a new breed of indigenous people who could be assimilated into the greatest society in Canada. The last residential school closed only in the year 1996. Expectedly, the result would be generations of indigenous people who would ultimately have no sense of cultural and religious belonging. In fact, on the 27th of October 2022, the residential school system was unanimously declared as genocide by the Canadian Parliament. T.N. Bannock Stories, First Nations Community of Poetic Voices, is a compilation of poems published in 2007 as, as an attempt to express how the different entities of nature have been crucial for the indigenous peoples of Canada for centuries. These poems also reflect that since the Western settlers landed, the Canadian natural landscape has witnessed deforestation, air pollution, water contamination, and the near extinction of some species. By highlighting a few poems from this compilation, this paper has shown that the rebuilding of this relationship is directly related to an attempt to decolonize. The first poem, The Heartbeat, is by Komaka. Here, nature becomes the preserver of languages and cultures of the peoples of the First Nations. It is said to sound some ancient song, which it does in the form of drumming, drum here being another significant cultural marker. Komaka hope that this power lasts forever and their culture is not lost. Memory and repetition are two components of an oral culture which are incredibly significant in the preservation of knowledge for future generations and its dissemination. Here, as is often seen, the print medium and the English language are being used to reiterate the importance of these two components in the preservation of a knowledge system which is endangered. The second poem is My Indian Land by Jennifer Hirondell. I'm sorry about the pronunciation. This poem is about getting detached from one's land and not ever being able to get back to it again. And it is simply not a logistical challenge. Interestingly, the poet herself might not have ever actually lived there. It is rather a collective memory that has passed down generations. It is through this collective memory that she is bemoaning the loss of some land which she might have seen only in photographs. The wooden walls she is talking about might be a symbol of systematic usurpation of land. Land here is not only a legal property but a connection with nature and a sense of cultural belonging associated with it. My first count is a poem by Sherry Jubenville. In terms of the number of lines in a stanza and the number of stanzas, this follows the pattern of a sonnet, but in terms of rhyming scheme, it no longer sticks to the norm of a sonnet. This poem is very direct in what it wants to say and does so in the form of prose poetry. The poet is upset with how industrial waste in its different forms is contaminating the environment. It also addresses the carelessness on part of industrialists and governments related to environmental issues like pollution and how environmental conservation too ultimately becomes an issue that can be pushed to the background using monetary power. The poet holds the prolonged colonial rule responsible for issues like environmental degradation, climate crisis, and existential threat to the wildlife. The title of the next poem is Haiku 1 and Haiku 2 by George and Gregory. Here the poet writes two haikus in English which are perhaps translations of the two haikus written next to them in Choctaw language. It is the language of the Choctaw people in Oklahoma. Here again the language politics comes to the forefront. For a non-native of the language, it is almost impossible to know if the English poems are indeed translations of the original. The other noticeable aspect is the implementation of a non-European genre of poetry. The two haikus are unrelated to each other, but they can be symbolically connected to each other, where the first poem gives a grim imagery of a freezing winter and sets the tone. And in the second haiku, the poet likens the language Choctaw to a tree, which has lost its roots and has been severed from its mother forest, which might be seen as a language being separated from the culture that it is a part of, hence giving an inference that the culture in question has lost too. The poem Spirit of the Buffalo is by Nancy A. Lewis. As the title suggests, this poem celebrates the spirit of the buffalo. For the indigenous people in North America, the buffalo has been a source of food and warmth. Lewis is talking about a fast approaching winter, hinting towards a difficult time for the indigenous cultures of Canada. The buffaloes, which once roamed in huge numbers in the plains, suddenly found their survival at stake due to relentless hunting. The buffaloes were key sources of food for indigenous communities like the Plains and the Métis, but the most important aspect of buffalo hunting was fur trade. Until the last 2 decades of the 19th century, their population is predicted to be in thousands. At this point, the population started plummeting due to a culmination of several factors, which were largely due to human intervention. Perhaps one of the most impactful factors was the introduction of the railways. The other was, of course, the industrial scale hunting of buffaloes driven by a government policy. This move not only affected the animals but also the communities that needed the buffaloes to thrive for their own survival. The policy essentially robbed their economic independence, but here the buffalo is not seen just as a means of economic prosperity or source of food. The poet here finds the survival of the buffalo population under such odds inspiring. She thinks that their culture needs that kind of endurance when it is under threat. This poem, Spirit of the Bear, is by the same author. She asks the people of indigenous communities to learn from the bear's ability to survive major changes. Here the bear is both an actual living being, which is a part of the North American flora and fauna. It is battling climate change and the threat of poaching, but the bear is also a spiritual being who has been facing the west or battling the changes forced upon it by the Western world. Both grizzly bears and polar bears are spiritually significant for many First Nations communities. For instance, grizzly bears have coexisted with the First Nations peoples in British Columbia for centuries, and the latter look to protect them from various threats. The Inuit people of Arctic Canada have shared a close relationship with polar bears. Thank you.
Thank you, Shubham. Um, Obviously, I think almost we can agree upon a point that indigenous way of life can somehow be helpful in saving the ecological disaster that we are going through. And yes, you have through poems you have pointed this out that we can always take records in nature if we want to survive the long term. Thank you. And the last speaker of this first academic session is Shilpa UM, and her topic is Many Dunes Collective, Decolonizing Canadian Theatre, One Play at a Time.
The title of my presentation is Manidone's Collective, Decolonizing Canadian Theatre, One Play at a Time. The play I'll be discussing in this session is named Bug, written by Yolanda Bonnell. She is also one of the artistic leaders of this collective, along with another person called Cole Alvis. So the play is very close to my heart. The moment I started reading it, I have revisited the play a couple of times, and when I got the notification that there is a call for paper here, I wanted to present this play. Also because of the fact that I got an opportunity to talk to the author of this play. And I think the 2-hour long interview that I had with her literally deconstructed my idea of theater, how theater should be. For me, it was part of, I think it was passion. It is passion for me. But also it was about putting up something on the stage. But Yolanda taught me that theater is so much more than that. Theater is a community activity. Theater is something through which you always give back to your community. I thought giving back to your community meant that you have to write something and put it up on stage and you're giving back to community. But whatever she has done with Manidoon's collective, I think if at all someday I write something, that would be the way I want my theater to be. So I'll just go to the play. The play is named Bug. It talks about how a woman from an indigenous background she talks about the intergenerational trauma that herself, her mother, and her child is going through. So there are 3 characters in this play. The first character is definitely the girl. Then there is girl's mother. And then there is a character called the Manidoons. So Manidoons is an Ojibwe word for a small worm or an insect or a little spirit. So in this play, she has used the word to mean a worm or an insect, which creeps upon you without even yourself knowing it. So she connects Manidoons to the colonial influence that the indigenous people had to go through. So she says that when she was born from, the character was born from her mother, the character already had the presence of colonialism in her through the intergenerational trauma. So Manidoons are always already on your body when you are born into an indigenous community. And then there is the presence of the colonizers as white settlers around you, which gets to you in the form of alcoholism. So Manidoons actually mean both of these things. There is intergenerational trauma and also the thing surviving in a settler colonial country. So this is the basic introduction I wanted to give. Manidoons Collective is a circle of artists creating indigenous performances. They recognize the importance in collaborating with indigenous communities, specifically, I wanted to say one more thing, I'm sorry. The most amazing thing that attracted me towards Bug is that when the play was staged in 2020, Yolanda said that white people are not allowed to review the play. As in, only indigenous black people of color should come and review the play. And while I was talking to her, I obviously raised this question. There were a lot of controversies happening. She was attacked brutally online. The one thing she told me was that we have been trying to tell them the atrocities they have been doing to us. For years we have been saying that. And I think it is high time I ask them to step back. And I want to heal my sisters, my mothers, and my elders. And they are welcome to see the play. They can have their space. But I have drawn a line. I have created a boundary. So that's what she calls as the circle, where the performance, can you skip to the next slide? So this is the stage where the play happens. As you can see, there is a central space where Yolanda performs, and there are a couple of chairs as it is arranged as a circle. So into this space, only the indigenous people, especially the indigenous women, are allowed in that space, and she calls them witnesses, and she wants them to experience the play. She wants the non-white people, the white people to also, non-indigenous people to also experience the play, but the primary audience for her is definitely her sisters and elders. So, yeah. Yolanda Bonnell is an Ojibwe South Asian storyteller. They developed Manidoons Collective first play titled Bug, along with Cole Alvis, who is also an artistic leader of the group. The play was nominated for 4 Dora Moore Award, and the published play was shortlisted for the Governor General's Literary Award. This paper is an attempt to look at how Manidoon's collective was able to decolonize Canadian theatre and initiate indigenous theatrical practice artistically and socially. Yolanda Bonnell's Bug is a story of an indigenous woman's journey towards healing the intergenerational trauma and addiction that colonialism left her. The play begins with land acknowledgement, describing how all organisms on the Turtle Island put aside their differences and gather together by the Great Lake to discuss the arrival of Anishinaabe people. I quote, humans who would be the protectors of land and water and all living beings in the cycle of life, unquote. They agreed to take care of each other, the land, water, and the animals in it. This is immediately followed by a song by an elder in the circle. The song describes what the play and the storyteller want the witnesses to understand. It talks about how a tree of poison and self-loathing, it is colonialism, had been planted long back. The poison had cycled so much that it is now embedded into its bark. With sickness and poison embedded, it is difficult to navigate a system that is built to fail them. I quote, sickness was planted in us and we are trying to get well. Everything is heavier, harder, unquote. Even though circumstances have been adverse for decades, the people are resilient and they know how important it is to keep living. The song ends with, I quote, the tree may be sick, but our ancestors are lush green leaves that continue to give us life, unquote. The girl, the character through whom we navigate the lives of indigenous women, is born in the circle. Naming the characters as the girl, mother, and Manidoons help the witness to relate more to the play. Equally important is the title of the play, Bug. Yolanda says that she conceived the idea to write the play during the second year of her theatre school. While she was crossing the road, she almost stepped on a bug by the pavement. It was an epiphanic moment for her. She says, I quote, I almost stepped on it. Does it know? Is it aware of its space in the world? How does it view itself in comparison to these giant creatures that are walking around it? And then the correlation between that and the treatment of indigenous women was not lost on me, unquote. Manidoons is an Ojibwe word for little spirit, worm, or small insect, which represents the residue and the intergenerational presence of colonialism. They appear at different points in the play, where the girl's life reaches a turning point. They represent the omnipresent threat of colonialism in the form of addiction, domestic violence, alcoholism, waiting to catch up and devour their lives. In the introduction to Staging Coyote's Dream, Monique Mojica and Rick Knowles has summarized what theatre means for indigenous people. It states, I quote, when you call upon the ancestors, someone is going to show up. It becomes necessary to create a space, a container that tells the spirit that's its play. The container is theatre, unquote. They further point out that theatre is not just a fiction that is to put up on stage for entertainment. The stories are essential ways of communicating memory, history, belief, and tradition. Theatre is a container through which the indigenous stories are told. 6 years later, in the second volume to Staging Coyote's Dream, they talk about how even after 20 years, they are still on the path of healing and reworking the victim narrative. Answering Highway's quote, before the healing can take place, the poison must first be exposed. And Yolanda is exposing the poison through Bug. She uses both physical and social means to implement it. In the first place, she creates a clear demarcation of the theatrical space. She creates a ceremonial space at the center. The stage is set in a circle with chairs placed immediately around the performance area. The circle of chairs is reserved for the indigenous witnesses, especially indigenous women. That is how it is. Traditionally, our stories were, I quote, traditionally our stories were told in a circle and it was never about the theatrics of it. The circle is a big part of me, unquote. The play exposes how the descendants of the colonial masters keep exploiting the indigenous children through the foster care system, which seems to be a natural continuation of the residential school system. The residual effect of colonialism, like addiction, substance abuse, alcoholism, are held against the indigenous people to declare them unfit to take care of their children. By creating a circle of indigenous witnesses who share and carry over these stories, Yolanda transformed the play into an artistic ceremony of healing. So while I was talking to her about this ceremony of circle, and I saw the title of national literature, what Yolanda told me is that there is no first in us. It is always about the circle. You know, you cannot decide a first in a circle. It just goes on and on and on. So when you are talking about national literature, or when you are talking about who came first, who wrote first, you're literally moving away from what I am aiming at, what I am aiming to give my community. So the circle is very important. Non-Indigenous people are advised to take seats behind this row in the margins of the ceremonial circle and reflect upon how the play affects them. They are invited to learn the ways in which their racist ancestors exploited the indigenous population and their culture. While the indigenous person is presented as someone undertaking a healing journey, the non-indigenous caste appears as the Manidoons or the bug, an infection which painstakingly devours the indigenous body. The intentional demarcation of space is both literal and ideological. Though there are perpetual talks about justice and reconciliation, the truth is that most of it remains in paper, and the indigenous people are always expected to do the labor of teaching the colonial atrocity to the settlers. Yolanda, through Bug, states that their priority is healing their sisters, mothers, and elders. This ceremonial space is sacred because she carved it away from the colonial theatrical space for her people to heal. In the foreword to the play, Jill Carter rightly calls it an irreconcilable space where the protection process of healing happens. So I also happened to talk to her about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and this is one of the words that she told me. There is always going to be this irreconcilable space in my theater for the white people. You think that we are going to, I don't think we cannot forgive for what they have done, but it has been a long time that we have been trying to forgive and move forward. So I think she told me that there's always healthier to have that boundary and let them know that, you know, until and unless you address what you have done all by yourself, you are not welcome to this space. What happens inside the ceremonial space? Yolanda is a storyteller. Theatre is the container through which she is presenting her stories. The genre of solo show suits the play because it is also one person on stage telling her story. One of the main characteristics associated with the Eurocentric idea of solo show is that it breaks the fourth wall to talk to the audience and make them an active part of the show. In indigenous theatre, there exist no barriers as it happens in a ceremonial circle. The witnesses are already part of the narrative. Theatre is a circle of story. I quote, "First is somewhat problematic in terms of indigenous worldviews, where we work in circle, where humility demands that none of us is more important than the others. Who can be first in a circle?" Unquote. Every performance is followed by a talkback where the witness converses with the performers, sharing their experience. The play has progressed and attained the present form through these conversations, which provide healing for both the performer and the witnesses. By providing generic names to characters and thereby making them personal for each witness, Yolanda acknowledges the existence of multitude of stories. She assures the witness that they are not alone in this healing journey. I quote, "I had indigenous women stand up every single night and tell me how important it was that I told this story and that they saw themselves in it." Unquote. A structure which resembles a spider web created above the performance space by Mohawk scenographer Jay Heavens is also a testimony to this journey. Like the bug, the web also has a dual existence. It can simultaneously become the web of colonial influence, and each strand can represent a story of survival. The disadvantage of surviving in a settler colonial state is that the threat is omnipresent. It is not an event in the past from which people have to evolve. The ceremonial space then resembles a spear where the girl is surrounded by Manidoons and the web, resembling the presence of the perpetrator around the indigenous person. The same spear becomes the space of resilience and healing through shared experience from the witnesses. Manidoons Collective did not limit the shared experience to the confines of theatrical space. They requested the media to send IBPOC, that is Indigenous, Black, People of Color, writers to review the show during its production in 2020. This created a huge backlash against Yolanda and the collective. Before that, I would like to show some of the slides, just some of the pictures. This is Yolanda Bonnell. She herself performed in the play. She'll pull over that hood, which has the picture of insects in it, if you can see that in the hood. Next picture. There is a famous scene when Yolanda, the character, the girl turns 15 or 16. There is a violence domestic violence from her partner's side, and this is one way she has been dragged in the play. So that is the picture. This is how she talks to the firefly. So there are three kinds of bug that we see in this play. The one bug is the bug that the girl represents, who is all the indigenous women. Then there is a bug that is the Manidoons, which is the colonialism's effect. And then there is the firefly, that the girl, when she was very young, when she was in her space, in her aunt's space, she saw a small, very small firefly which emits light. She wanted to ingest the firefly so that she can also get light. That firefly is actually hope for her. So this is her talking about that. Then there is another slide. Next one. This is her catch towards the end of the play. So yeah. Yolanda faced racist, sexist, and fatphobic attacks online. This was an attempt by the collective to bring in more voices that can relate to the story, rather than the play being reviewed by a standardized settler gaze. The problem with reviewers from popular publication is that they come with their Eurocentric understanding of theatre and expect an indigenous play to fulfill their list of basic requirements. The reviewer is someone who stands between the audience and the performance. Their spoken words have the power of making or breaking a performance. Yevit Nolan understands the problem as the indigenous people, I quote, are not being assessed fairly. That the reviewer brings his teaching, his worldview, and his lens to view the work. The reviewer does not review what he sees, but what he wishes he had seen. This was not the first time an indigenous artist had made such a request. Yolanda followed the play Kamloopa, Kim Senglip Harvey. For Kamloopa, instead of reviews, love letters were invited from indigenous women. Yolanda was more vocal and specific in her demand, which triggered the criticism. The responses from mainstream media critics proved Bonnell right. Rather than thinking about why such a request was made, the critics were fixated on the fact that they were not allowed to review. So there is a whole paragraph about how the Globe and Mail and the Toronto Star responded to Yolanda's request. One of them was, the title of one of them was The Color of Criticism, How Should Media Respond When an Artist Asks for Only Non-White Critics to Review Them, which was not Yolanda's request. Yolanda asked people of color aren't invited to bug, which was also actually not true, because Yolanda or the production house did not ban anybody from attending, but she just requested that only IBPOC writers review the play. And then there was a whole fight between Yolanda and the Globe and Mail, and finally the person from the Globe and Mail came up with another article. A Cree professor and a white critic went to Yolanda Bonnell's bug, then they discussed. The intense urge to put oneself, a settler white man's opinion into this discussion shows how ignorant are the mainstream critics to racism in criticism. The best takeaway from the discussion was when Neestruck asked Professor Karen Recollect to give the play a verdict, a thumbs up or a thumbs down. She replied, I quote, this is one of my favorite quotes, if I were to provide a rating, then it would be a full-on constellation, I quote, unquote. Since she understood Bonnell's intentions, she tried her best to not serve the expected stereotypical reviewing. Sidney Lynch and Michelle MacArthur studies this issue in their essay, Critical Disengagement, the Epistemic and White Supremacist Violence of Theatre Criticism in Canada and the USA. So they call this as critical disengagement, which is, it is a form of silencing whereby a critic's refusal to reciprocate within a communicative exchange enacts epistemic violence by undermining the experience and knowledge that inform the artwork. They discovered three broad forms of critical disengagement, such as othering, which happens with the artist, imposing, which happens with the artist's work, and the last is self-centering, which centered around the critic. And this happened with Bonnell. When she requested only IBPOC writers to review her play, the critics took it very personally. The white critics took it very personally. Instead of taking advantage of the moment and to examine the structural problems of racism and criticism, critics chose to focus more on how the request impacted them. So they were, in a way, they were proving Bonnell's point. The conversations that centered around the play made it evident how Manidoons Collective was giving it back to the community. Yolanda's vision was clear when she wanted the indigenous community to benefit from her play. So, can you text? So this is the website of Manidoons Collective. This is actually a moving picture. You feel like this thing is like a campfire, but it is actually fireflies. Next slide. So this is how they tour Bug in all over Canada. They've written it very well that they want the community to be involved in the process. Next slide. There are 13 practices listed in the website of Manidoons Collective to facilitate indigenizing theatre. The labor that Manidoons began in decolonizing theatre has reached a point where they are indigenizing theatre. Rather than creating a theatre collective with a strict rehearsal schedule, they have shorter work days and longer rehearsal period. They conduct a check-in circle to understand how the artists are feeling physically, mentally, and spiritually. The space do not ask you to dehumanize yourself in order to rehearse. They have a wellness table which may include items of self-soothing, snacks, books, etc. There is a space for everyone to be themselves. I quote, colonization was never about community, it was about greed and power. The theatre industry as a part of the colonial capitalist wheel is about how you can do in less amount of time, how much you can do in less amount of time. There needs to be a certain level of care and understanding when it comes to vulnerable communities, unquote. Bug is an open-ended play. The play ends with the word hope. The girl says, I see those beetles in your curly hair. She knows that her daughter is going to have the same problems she has. In order to prevent that from happening, she should fight, and she does that in the end. Hope then signifies that the girl eventually overcomes addiction and gets her child back. Hope is that the girl will be able to let her child know that, I quote, her ancestors are lush green leaves that give her life. The beauty of interpretation is how much hope you live with. At the end of this, Bug will find its way out. The courage that Manidoons Collective and Yolanda displayed through their first play provides immense hope for the indigenous community. They could fight and withstand the storm of criticism because of the community that Bug created. Yolanda held a mirror against the colonial masters in her ceremonial space and invited them to reflect on the hurt they inflicted on the land, water, and its people. Thank you.
Thank you, Shilpa, for such an interesting presentation. It was really very mesmerizing. And I also thank you, three speakers, for completing the session on time. And I hope there are many questions, but before that, I would like to make some observations. Personally, I could understand, I understood Shilpa's paper when I associated this paper with Hari Haran sir's lecture in the previous, that the woman, the violence inflicted on them, and the way they have sorted out a way to heal themselves, that is this performance in the form of circle, which is very indigenous to them, and they at no point of time require any outsider's consent. And this is their personal space, own space. This can even, we can also understand this with the form when we look at the Soharai painting of Santal, which paintings are mostly, this is the domain of Santal women, and wall painting, and also wall painting. If you go to their houses, you will see very geometrical paintings, nature paintings, which is their personal space where no man is allowed. And it happens only during the Soharai festival. So it is also that the domain which are denied in the culture is that take this artistic form to relieve themselves. And I understood Shubham's paper when I can associate with Suchrita this paper, lecture previous, that the indigenous people, that they were denied certain rights, that their land was taken away, that they were sent to away to residential school, which was again a conscious or non-conscious way of alienating them from their indigenous identity, which could be, again, you can take recourse, or we can rebuild, reconstruct our that indigeneity if we look into the nature. Why? Because nature has always been something which is indigenous to these people. They keep nature alive, they keep this ecological balance between nature and themselves through their rituals, through their stories, which again we can find many examples if we look around our neighboring communities. And then the third and the first, which is a very modern technological platform, which I think indigenous literatures can have a space of popularizing themselves in the form of games, because in the present generation, game is more interesting than reading, and where the digital platforms which provide reading and gaming at the same time can prove a way more fruitful for indigenous literatures, which are again denied access space in the mainstream publication or literature. So I'm obvious that many of us will have curiosities and questions. So now our speakers are open to take your questions, if any, observations, if any.
identify yourself?
Um, is there a need of identification? Is there a need? Okay, I am Nandini from JUCL. I think that's enough. Yeah. The Comparative Literature Department of Jadavpur University. Um, I really liked the text that you have pulled up for the forum. It's a really interesting one. I have a comment to make. If the existence of the bug is, if it is ever existing, then it really becomes difficult to identify the existence of the bug. And the fact that they're identifying it, and the fact that they're moving towards a process of healing and a process of reclamation, it's a really remarkable thing, because if it is ever present, then how is it possible to really identify it, considering the dual presence of the bug, and she's being the bug, and she's metamorphosizing into I don't know. I mean, she's taking it to a different corner completely. This is really I think it's pretty good. I really like the text. Thank you so much.
I like holding place for people. That is what she said. And then another thing she said is that I asked her, don't you feel tired? Because you are doing a lot. It is not just theater. It is not just putting up a play on stage. It is about community outreach. You are going to people. You are listening to their traumas, and it is going to affect you. Then she said, sometimes you can be the bug on the pavement. Sometimes I can also be the scorpion, which can wound people. So, don't consider me to be the bug who needs your sympathy. I'm also sometimes the bug who is a scorpion, and I told people, the white people, not to come and review my play. I can be a scorpion, but I can also be a bug. The point that you raised is very important, because you don't know how to differentiate the colonial impact in your world, and that is a very sad state to be. If you talk to these people, if you before another conference which happened in our institute, I worked on Rebecca Belmore's installation artworks. It also talks about the missing indigenous women. It is, I mean, we talk about trauma a lot. We keep referring to the missing and murdered indigenous women. We talk about truth and reconciliation. All of this becomes a term, and sometimes we forget the fact that these are actual living people who have went missing and who have been murdered. And that is something, when I was talking to Yolanda, that is something I realized, that these people, she says that we no longer name them because there is so much. If there is a war happening, if you see people being murdered on a daily basis, you know that there is a war happening. But this is also a war against the indigenous population, which has been going on for a very long time. And the sheer resilience of these people, the fact that even after all this while, she decided that, I'm going to do this. This is her first play. This is the first play Manidu's collective have come up with, 2016. And it's so brave of her, because I literally had a talk with this person called Karen Fricker. And towards the end of our conversation, she was telling me, I'm so fed up with all the identity plays that comes these days. Everybody wants something to identify with. And I got very offended by it, because you might get offended, because it is my story. I would like to say that this is who I am. The fact that Yolanda asked the white people not to review her story is because you won't be able to recognize with their story. For you, there was also this collective called Tita Collective. It is a group of Filipino women doing theatre in Toronto. They always perform during the Toronto Fringe Festival. So there was another critic who went to their play, Tita Jokes. And she went on to write a whole criticism about how she didn't understand the word meaning of Tita, and that she had to Google the word meaning, and even that is only when she realized what it means. So there was a response from one of the actors. She said, "I'm so happy you had to Google it. That is our life in your soil." See, they have to translate every day. Go to Google and search for Tita. You lost your, mind. So yeah, I'm so happy I came across this play, and I'm so happy. I hope everybody loved it. I would love everybody to read the play.
No, not that. There's no hierarchy. Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing back memories, actually. I could connect. Bhikshutritadi was continuously looking at me and saying, it's your zone. You have actually landed where I was there, I think 15, 16 years back. But the thing is that for me, it's revisiting because I know most of the people you are talking about. Because you have mentioned Monique, with whom I was workshopping for a play. And very interestingly, you have mentioned Jill Carter. Jill Carter was doing her PhD then when I was there from University of Toronto. And she was actually supposed to be a part of this conference. And Cole Alvis, this lanky man, Cole was actually an intern at Native Earth Performing Arts. So what happened that things go up and then go down. Like Native Earth Performing Arts became the epitome of indigenous resistance narrative after 1990, especially plays like Rest Sisters and Thompson Highways. Dry Leaves Ottawa Moved to Kapuskasing was premiered by them. Very interestingly, they lost the space. The space where you went, it's no more. Yeah. So it is. Yes. So what happened that there were other theatre companies which were coming up, like Buddies in Bad Time Theatres, which produced Wawati for Visitors, Agwake. Probably one area we will be discussing tomorrow in Nishant's talk, which discusses about the two-spiritedness, because in the indigenous context, gender is really a problematic category. It is definitely not the European category of gender violence or gender as we understand. And then coming to the installation and the kind of setup that you're talking about, it also reminds me of another significant playwright, Jean Genet, Black, where he says that at least there should be one man whose face is painted as white so that I can know to whom I am hurling all my curses. So it's just the river that if there aren't any white people in the audience, then paint the face white of any black person you find so that I know whom it is directed to. So I believe it is very interesting. And the Black Box Theatre, in which Almighty Voice was premiered in 2010, is the similar space which you're talking about, because the idea was to have the audience here, and it was directly directed towards the white people because Almighty's Voice's wife was named White Girl. So she appeared on stage. Before I watched the play, when I read it, when Shucharitadi taught us, so it is very important to be there, realize, to understand the context, because otherwise you don't understand how gradually White Girl would take out her paint and come out of that. Like how they are whitewashed. So White Girl who used the white painting on her face gradually removes, and it's a ghost narrative that is happening. Related with what Sir was trying to say is that is Canada post-colonial at all? This entire controversy of which Ajoy Heble and others really points out significantly, that yes, considering the situation that you're talking about, these continuous, I would say, interventions from the cultural activists from the indigenous communities, probably they are opening up avenues of revisiting indigeneity and creating a, I would say, pan-world consciousness. And of course, this also promoted UNO to take serious discussions and debates on what is indigeneity, because who is an indigenous person, what is indigeneity, which Professor Banerjee was talking about, because there is a kind of performativity in it. Beading is definitely one of those. Smudging is definitely one of those. So how do you reclaim the space is very important. And I should say that I was very proud of Anita, the way she conducted it. She's our student, and we're really proud of you that as an indigenous woman, reclaiming your identity has been a part of your thesis, and how you have reclaimed your identity through promoting an alternative historiography, because that's our thesis all about, that Why is it that there are so many lapses, or why are we replicating colonial frameworks of history writing even as Santals? So, which means decolonization of the academia has begun, and probably it has begun through women like you. So, a huge round of applause for all the indigenous women who are really struggling a lot to have their feet. Thank you.
Very quickly, this is a question to all three of you. Um, what I felt is that listening to the three presentations, I thought you all kind of zeroed in on a very big question, a very important question. And I assume that all the three presentations were talking about or raising this question as to how you read and different interfaces that come, the challenges that come. But my question is, what is your understanding of how to read? This is my question to all three of you. It's a very simple question. Shilpa is smiling. She knows me. Yeah. So this is the question I have. We can start with him and go on like that.
What sir is asking, but how would you read? Means given text, means from your personal perspective, not what others have said, but your own organic perspective.
I don't know whether I'm going to answer this correctly or not, but what I think actually is that if I feel any kind of disconnect at any point of time while reading a work, then I must dig deeper into the context and understand what is going on, what the what all those words are going to mean in that particular context, or how can I situate that work in a particular historiography. So my aim will be definitely to place this work among the works. So this is my answer. So if I am reading the work today, so my location is just of a student living in Bolpur Shantiniketan, and so from the past experiences, the past reading experiences that I have is going to shape my present reading in a way. And I think that with time, with more reading, I shall be able to evolve my style and understanding of reading a text. Thank you, sir.
Sir, I think we need to strike a balance between subjectivity and objectivity somewhere, which is, of course, easier said than done. But I think that is the way to go, I think. Yes. Yes, of course.
No, no, I asked that because you talked a lot about collective memory and climate change, but when you talked about climate change, I thought that what you had in mind, what the poems that you were talking about, see, they had a profound understanding of geography. So, my understanding was that you were talking about climate change and geography. So, how would a reader, let's say in India, how would we read those shifts in geography and the shifts that have emerged over a course of time while you read that geography? So that is where the how to read comes to you. This is something that you could really think about.
Your position vis-a-vis your subjectivity and objectivity, what is your position? Where do you stand?
I think I can associate as being a part of a colonial history. That is where the subjectivity comes from, I guess. Uh, and the objectivity is not uh, really, what to say, take sides, even though one might find similarities or sympathize even at times. I think there is still a need to be objective to gain some distance.
It's a game because without game we cannot do anything about without indigenous literature. Yes.
I don't know if I've answered your question, but
I think I read very personally. I mean, I don't have any explanations for it, but I read very personally. I try to relate with what I'm reading, and probably that is why I ended up with theater, especially women's solo performances. I take things personally, I read personally.
Okay, where's the firefly in your reading?
I think I'm also reaching out for the firefly. I mean, one of the reason why I can relate with the indigenous women and their plays is because I mean I went to see a lot of plays while I was doing my fellowship, but the only Toronto, yeah. So I went to, I think, around 13 plays for Fringe Festival I was there, but the only play I could connect with was Tita, Miss Tita was, which was by Tita Collective. And then I was at Native Earth Performing Arts. They had a reading. It was also kind of a circle. And somehow I felt at home in these two places and none of the other places. So I think somehow when I read something, I want to personally relate with it. And I mean, I have not reached my firefly yet, but this is the process I think I am going to. Yeah, of course.
Very important.
Yes. Thank you.
It's a brilliant session. Thank you. We are running much behind time, but it's okay.
Thank you, David.
Yes. Thank you. Can I offer you some coffee?
Thank you, Anita Di, and also thank you to our three speakers. We will start our second academic session right away. I request Dr. Shoma Mukherjee to preside over the session as chair. Dr. Shoma Mukherjee teaches at Center for Comparative Literature, Bhasha Bhavan, Vishwabharati. As speakers for this session, we have Srimati Arghotapa Nag and Srimati Anindita Das. Over to you, Shoma.
Thank you. Welcome to second academic session for the International Conference on Interrogating National Literatures, Cultural Responses of Indigenous Peoples in Canada and India, 2000 to 2020. In this session, there are 3 paper readers, I think, Dhiman. One is absent, Arghotapa is here. অর্ঘ্যতপা নাগ যাদবপুর বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ে রাষ্ট্রবিজ্ঞান বিষয়ে স্নাতক ও স্নাতকোত্তর, পশ্চিমবঙ্গ রাষ্ট্রীয় বিশ্ববিদ্যালয় থেকে বিএড, আকাশবাণী কলকাতা পাবলিকেশন হাউস ইত্যাদির সঙ্গে যুক্ত, সঞ্চালনা করেন কল্যাণী বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ের ন্যাশনাল সার্ভিস স্কিম বিষয়ক প্রতিযোগিতায় প্রবন্ধ বিভাগে বিজয়ী। অর্ঘ্যতপা নাগ, she completed her graduation and post-graduation in political science from Jadavpur University. She completed her B.Ed from West Bengal State University. She is associated with publication houses, Akashbani Kolkata, etc. Today, title of her presentation is a presentation in Bangla. The Bangla title is মৌখিক ভাষা সংরক্ষণে মুদ্রণ গণ ও অন্যান্য মাধ্যমের ভূমিকা. The rough translation would be role of print, mass and other mediums in oral language preservation. Dhiman, 15 minutes. Thank you. Over to Argota.
প্রথমেই অনেক অনেক ধন্যবাদ জানাই বিশ্বভারতীর ভাষা বিভাগকে, ভাষা ভবনকে আমাকে সুযোগ দেওয়ার জন্য, যে আজকে আমি আমার সীমিত জ্ঞানের মধ্যে যতটুকু জানি সেই তার উপর আমি ভাগ করে নিতে চাই। আমি যে পেপারটা মানে যে কাজটা করেছি সেইটা মূলত মৌখিক ভাষা মানে যে কোনো ওরাল ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ কিভাবে প্রিজার্ভ হতে পারে বা কিভাবে সংরক্ষণ করা যেতে পারে। আমার ফোকাসটা ভারত এবং পশ্চিমবঙ্গের ওয়েস্ট বেঙ্গলের বিভিন্ন ভাষার মধ্যে কেন্দ্রীভূত, কিন্তু আমি এখানে যেটা বলবার চেষ্টা করেছি মানে আমার পেপারের মূল বক্তব্য সেটা হচ্ছে এটা সম্ভাবনা মানে পসিবিলিটিস, কী কী উপায়, মানে এটা নট অনলি মানে আমাদের ভারতের জন্য না বা আমাদের কোনো একটা স্টেট কেন্দ্রিক নয়, ওভারঅল যে কোনো কানাডা হোক বা যেগুলো আমাদের বহু সংস্কৃতি বা মাল্টিকালচারাল যে সমস্ত দেশ আছে যেখানে ভাষাগুলো বিপন্ন, মানে যে ভাষাগুলো আস্তে আস্তে বিভিন্ন ভাষা আমরা কথা বলা মানে ওরাল ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ মৌখিক ভাষা মাতৃভাষা জানিয়ে আমরা বড় হচ্ছি কিন্তু সেই ভাষা আমরা ব্যবহার করতে পারছি না, বিভিন্ন কারণে আমাদের ইউজ হচ্ছে না, মানে মূল যে ভাষা সেটা ইংরেজি মাধ্যম হোক বা আমাদের কাজের দুনিয়া আসার জন্য সেই ভাষাগুলোকে কী করে কীভাবে প্রিজার্ভ হচ্ছে বা আরও কী হতে পারে আমাদের সামনেই হয়তো আছে, ছড়ানো রয়েছে, আমরা সেগুলোকেই আরও কীভাবে বাড়াতে পারি যাতে করে আমরা আমাদের মূল সংস্কৃতিকে বা রুটকে না ভুলে যেতে পারি, সেইটাই আর কি। এটা খানিকটা সম্ভাবনা বলা যেতে পারে আমার পেপারটাকে, আবার খানিকটা আমি যেটুকু আর কি অবজার্ভ করেছি তার উপর ভিত্তি করে। প্রথমেই বলা যেতে পারে আমাদের ভূমিকায় যে আমাদের ভারত বহু ভাষাভাষী নাগরিকের দেশ, বহু সংস্কৃতি কৃষ্টির দেশ, যে সভ্যতা অবশ্যই বিশ্বের প্রাচীনতম সভ্যতা মানে সিভিলাইজেশনগুলোর মধ্যে অনেক প্রাচীনতম, এবং এখানে বিবিধ ভাষার সংস্কৃতি গড়ে উঠেছে। ভাষাগত দিক থেকে হিন্দিতে একটা প্রবাদ আছে যেখানে বলা হয়েছে কোষ কোষ পর বদলে পানি চার কোষ পর বাণী, মানে প্রত্যেক 4 কোষ অন্তর যেরকম জল বদলাচ্ছে ঠিক সেরকমই প্রতি 4 কোষ অন্তর আমাদের ভারতের ভাষাগত কিন্তু পরিবর্তন হচ্ছে, এবং সেই জন্যেই আরও বেশি করে ভাষার সংরক্ষণ রিজার্ভ করা প্রয়োজন। আবার অন্যভাবেও বলা যায় যে আমাদের ভারত যেহেতু একটা বৈচিত্র্যময় দেশ, মাল্টিকালচারাল, অনেক ভাষা, অনেক ক্ষুদ্র জাতি, জনজাতি, উপজাতি, ট্রাইবাল, তাদের প্রত্যেককে নিয়ে এই কালচার গড়ে উঠেছে যাকে ইন্ডিয়ান কালচারাল হেরিটেজ যেভাবে স্থাপিত হয়েছে, মানে বৈচিত্র্যের মধ্যে ঐক্য। তো এই ঐক্য কিভাবে হতে পারে, মানে বৈচিত্র্যগুলোকে কিভাবে একটা জায়গার মধ্যে এনে আমরা রক্ষা করতে পারি, তো বিবিধের মধ্যে মিলন যেটা যাতে রক্ষিত হতে পারে তার জন্য কি কি করা যেতে পারে, মানে যেহেতু একটা কথা বলা যেতে পারে যে আজকের দিনে আমাদের এই বহু সংস্কৃতি সম্পন্ন যে ভারত তাতে তার বিভিন্ন ভাষাগুলো চ্যালেঞ্জ বা প্রতিবন্ধকতার সামনে দাঁড়াচ্ছে। সেটা কীভাবে মিশ্র সংস্কৃতি, যেহেতু বিভিন্ন সংস্কৃতি সেটা হিন্দি হোক বা যে কোনো অন্য আমরা বাইরের দেশের সংস্কৃতি হোক তার অনেক বহুল ব্যবহারের জন্যে তাদের আধিপত্যের কারণে, এছাড়া আমাদের সংস্কৃতিগত দিক থেকে বিভিন্ন বাধা আসছে, বিশ্বায়ন গ্লোবালাইজেশন একটা বড় পয়েন্ট, যে গ্লোবালাইজেশনের কারণে এখন আমাদের ভাষা বা সংস্কৃতিগত দিক থেকে তার একটা চ্যালেঞ্জ আসছে। এছাড়া সংযোগকারী ভাষা, মানে আমাদের যেহেতু ভারত একটা বহু ভাষাকেন্দ্রিক সংস্কৃতির দেশ, তাকে লিঙ্ক করার জন্য আমরা কিছু আমরা মূল ভাষা প্রধান ভাষা ব্যবহার করে থাকি, তার জন্য আমাদের প্রতিবন্ধকতা বা চ্যালেঞ্জ আসছে যে ছোট ভাষা বা মানে যে জনজাতির ভাষাগুলো ততটা মানে আমরা তাদের কথা তো জানিও না, এরকম অনেক আছে, আমি বলতে গেলে পেপারটা আস্তে আস্তে গেলে জানতে পারবো, এরকম তাদের ভাষাগুলো তাদের কি বলবো সত্তা হারিয়ে ফেলছে, বা তারা হয়তো এমন একটা ভৌগোলিক অঞ্চলে আছে তাদের কথা আমরা জানতেই পারছি না, খুব সামান্যই তাদের সামনে আসছে। তো এই সমস্ত বাধাগুলো নিয়েই আমাদের এগোতে হচ্ছে। তার আগে আমাদের সংবিধানের কথা যদি বলা যায়, বর্তমানে ভারতীয় সংবিধান অনুমোদিত ভাষা, ভারতীয় সংবিধান দ্বারা অনুমোদিত 22টি ভাষা রয়েছে। তার মধ্যে 14টি ভাষাকে 22টি ভাষাকে রয়েছে, আর মূল সংবিধানে 14টা ভাষাকে স্বীকৃতি দেওয়া হয়েছিল। এরপর 21তম সংবিধান, যেটা হয়েছিল 1967 সালে, সেখানে সিন্ধি ভাষাকে 1971 সালে সংশোধনের মাধ্যমে হচ্ছে কোঙ্কনি, মণিপুরি, নেপালি, এই 3 ভাষাকে, এবং পরবর্তীকালে 2003 সালের 92তম সংবিধান সংশোধন, তার মাধ্যমে সাঁওতালি, মৈথিলি আর ডোগরি এই ভাষাগুলোকে স্বীকৃতি দেওয়া হয়েছে। যদিও ভারতে কোনো রাষ্ট্রীয় ভাষা নেই, কিন্তু এবং ভারতের সংবিধান অনুসারে যে কোনো নাগরিক যে কোনো ভাষাতেই কথা বলতে পারেন। আর তারপরে বলা যেতে পারে রবীন্দ্রনাথের কথাও। তিনি শিক্ষার সাঙ্গীকরণ প্রবন্ধে বলেছিলেন যে শিক্ষায় মাতৃভাষায় মাতৃদুগ্ধ। আসলে তিনি পাশ্চাত্যের যে জাতীয়তাবাদ বা পাশ্চাত্য ভাষার যে অত্যন্ত বেশি চলন, মানে ঢুকে যাওয়া আমাদের জ্ঞান চর্চার মাধ্যমে, সেটাকে এড়িয়ে তিনি মাতৃভাষার মাধ্যমে জ্ঞান চর্চা করতে বলেছিলেন, যাতে করে মাতৃভাষা আমাদের দেশের ভাষা, সেই ভাষাগুলো অনেক স্বতঃস্ফূর্তভাবে মানুষের মনের ভাব জোগাতে পারে এবং মানুষ যাতে তার ভাষার সঙ্গে একাত্ম থাকে। তো এখানে যে বিভিন্ন ভাষা আর উপভাষা কিভাবে অস্তিত্বগুলোকে সংরক্ষণ করা যায়, তার ওয়ে আউট হিসেবে বা তার কাজ, মানে সেগুলোর জন্য কীভাবে মুদ্রণ মাধ্যম, মানে প্রিন্ট মিডিয়া কাজ করে চলেছে, চেষ্টা করছে, এবং অন্যান্য মিডিয়া যারা কাজ করছে, তার একটা আমি রূপরেখা বা আমার অবজারভেশন থেকে আমি যেগুলো পেয়েছি সেটা তুলে ধরার চেষ্টা করছি। প্রথমেই যদি বলা যায় মুদ্রণ মাধ্যমের ভূমিকা, সেক্ষেত্রে আমাদের বিভিন্ন পাবলিকেশন হাউস বা মুদ্রণ মাধ্যম, এখন অনেক ছোট পাবলিকেশন হাউসও আছে, তারা চেষ্টা করে যে এমন বই করতে যেটা খুব মানে আদিবাসী বা এমন জনজাতিদের জীবন নিয়ে তৈরি করতে, যে জনজাতির জীবনের কথা তুলে ধরবে। হয়তো এই চেষ্টা এখনও অনেক কম হচ্ছে, মানে আরও বেশি করে আনা যেতে পারে, যেহেতু আমাদের মূল ভাষায় বা আমরা যে শুদ্ধ বাংলা ভাষায় কথা বলি তাতেই লিখিত হচ্ছে, কিন্তু তার মধ্যেও আমরা যদি, যেহেতু আমাদের সংরক্ষণ করতে হবে, সেই জন্য আমি বলতে পারি যে বিভিন্ন গল্প, উপন্যাস ভারতের গ্রামীণ জীবন এবং প্রান্তিক জীবনের উপর লিখিত হয়। এবার সেই প্রান্তিক জীবনের উপর যখন লিখিত হচ্ছে, তখন সেই গল্প উপন্যাসগুলোতে যদি আমরা তাদের জীবনের, তারা যে ডেইলি লাইফে যে ভাষা ব্যবহার করছে তাদের দৈনন্দিন জীবনে, সেই ভাষাকে যদি আমরা অবিকল অবিকৃত রাখি, তাহলে সেটা কিন্তু একটা খুব বড় ভাষার সংরক্ষণ বা আর্কাইভ হতে পারে। যেমন কোনো গল্পে কোচবিহার, দিনাজপুর, জলপাইগুড়ি প্রভৃতি অঞ্চলে ব্যবহৃত উপজাতীয় যে রাজবংশী ভাষা, এবং সেই রাজবংশী ভাষা, আমি এই ভাষাগুলো লেখার সময় আমি তাদের সঙ্গে কথা বলে নিয়েছি, মানে তাদেরকে আমি লিটারেলি জিজ্ঞেস করেছিলাম যে আপনারা বলুন কী ভাষায় কীভাবে কথা বলেন, কিন্তু তারা আমার সঙ্গে বাংলাতে কথা বলে, কিন্তু তাদের জিজ্ঞেস করার পর তারা আমাকে বলেছে আর কি। তো তারা বলছে যে যেরকম তারা বলছে কোর্টে যাওয়া ধরছিস, কিংবা মুই কোর্টে যাস, বা খান হয়েছে তোর, মানে খাওয়া হয়েছে তোর, এটা হচ্ছে টিপিক্যাল রাজবংশী ভাষা। তো কোটেশন যখন আমরা ব্যবহার করব কোনো বই তৈরি করার সময় বা লেখার সময়, যখন আমরা প্রুফ বা কম্পোজ করব, তখন এই ভাষাগুলোকে অনেক পাবলিকেশন হাউসে চেষ্টা করে যে একদম যা আছে কোট আনকোট, হয়তো অনেক সময় আমরা ঠিক করতে গিয়ে, অনেকে ঠিক করতে গিয়ে একটু পাল্টে দেন, কিন্তু না, ভাষার নিজস্ব মাধুর্য আছে বা তাদের নিজস্বতা রয়েছে, সেটাকে যদি অ্যাজ ইট ইজ রেখে দেওয়া যায়, ঠিক যেরকম আমরা সাঁওতাল পরগনা, যেটা বীরভূম, বাঁকুড়া প্রভৃতি জেলার কথ্য বাংলা ভাষা, সেটা হচ্ছে তুই কেমন আছিস বটে, মানে তুই কেমন আছিস, ঠিক এইরকম বাক্যাংশগুলোকে অবিকল একই রকম রেখে দিলে সেটা, এবং এই কয়েকটা ভাষার উদাহরণ ছাড়া আমি অন্য ভাষা উল্লেখ করছি, যেমন অসমীয়া হতে পারে, সেটা নেপালি ভাষা হতে পারে, তারা যখন চরিত্রের মধ্যে কথোপকথন করছে, সংলাপ করছে, মানে আদান প্রদান করছে, তখন তাদেরকে অবিকৃত রাখলে কিন্তু সেটা একটা খুব বড় আর্কাইভ হতে পারে। আরও একটা, যেটা এখনও আমি অতটা লক্ষ্য করিনি, কিন্তু আমার এটা মনে হয়েছে অবজারভেশন করতে গিয়ে, যে একটা মূল শব্দের শব্দভাণ্ডার বা টিকা তৈরি করা উচিত। মানে টিকা মানে হচ্ছে সেই শব্দের অর্থ কী, মানে কি, সেটা যদি আমরা তার সঙ্গে রেখে দিই। কিছু কিছু ক্ষেত্রে নন ফিকশন রাইটিংয়ে করা হয়, কিন্তু গল্প উপন্যাসে এখনও ততটা চালু হয়নি। তাহলে কিন্তু যিনি পাঠক তিনি পড়তে গিয়ে এই ভাষার সঙ্গে আরেকটু পরিচিত হবেন, বা হয়তো তিনি জানবেন যে এরকম একটা অঞ্চলে এরকম ভাষার একটা অস্তিত্ব রয়েছে। আচ্ছা, আরও একটা জিনিস হচ্ছে এরপর আঞ্চলিক ভাষার অভিধান মানে ডিকশনারি। আঞ্চলিক ভাষা সংরক্ষণের জন্য ডিকশনারি একটা খুব বড় ভূমিকা নিতে পারে। আঞ্চলিক ভাষার জনগোষ্ঠীয় ভাষাকে উন্নত করতে, আরও ডেভেলপ করতে কিন্তু ভাষার অভিধান খুবই গুরুত্বপূর্ণ মাধ্যম। বর্তমানে এমন অনেক দ্বিভাষিক আর ত্রিভাষিক ভাষার অভিধান পাওয়া যায়, কিন্তু সেভাবে উপজাতীয় বিভিন্ন ভাষাগুলোকে একত্র করে বিভিন্ন জেলার ভাষাকে সংরক্ষণের জন্য আলাদা আলাদা তাদের যে প্রবাদ, তারা যে প্রবচন ব্যবহার করে, সেই ভাষাগুলোকে নিয়ে যদি কাজ করা যায়, সেগুলোকে পরিমার্জিত এবং সংশোধন করা যায়, তাহলে মৌখিক ভাষা সংরক্ষণের দিক থেকে সেটা একটা গুরুত্বপূর্ণ গঠনমূলক মাধ্যম হতে পারে। আঞ্চলিক ভাষার সংবাদপত্র, নিউজ পেপার একটা মৌখিক ভাষা শিক্ষার জন্য অনেক বড় কর্মসূচি হতে পারে। কারণ যে কোনো জনজাতির মূল কণ্ঠস্বর হচ্ছে সংবাদপত্র, জাতির কণ্ঠ যাকে বলা যেতে পারে। আর জাতির কণ্ঠ যদি জাতির নিজের ভাষায় হয়, সেই অঞ্চলের জনগোষ্ঠীর মানুষের ভাষায় হয়, তাহলে সেটা বড় আর্কাইভের ভূমিকা পালন করে। কারণ নিউজ পেপার, মানে আমরা জানি যে নিউজ পেপার অনেক বছরের পর বছর অনেক পরেও মানুষের কোনো কাজ করতে গেলে, গবেষণা করতে গেলে, লিখতে গেলে, উপন্যাস লিখতে গেলে, গল্প যে কোনো কাজে লাগে। এবং সংবাদপত্র যদি যত মানুষের নিজস্ব আঞ্চলিক ভাষায় তৈরি হবে কেন্দ্র করে, তত কিন্তু সেই ভাষার সংরক্ষণ বা আর্কাইভের দিকটা অনেক বেড়ে যাবে। আর ভাষা শিক্ষার জন্য ডুওলিঙ্গোর মতো যেরকম অ্যাপ্লিকেশন আছে, সেই রকম অ্যাপ যদি আরও তৈরি হয়, তাহলেও মানুষ কিন্তু একটা এত বড় বহু সংস্কৃতি সম্পন্ন দেশের কোথায় কি ভাষা আছে তার সম্পর্কে জানতে পারবে, অনেকে হয়তো শিখতেও আগ্রহী হবেন। এরপর আমি আসছি পরোক্ষ, এগুলো তো প্রত্যক্ষভাবে কিভাবে সংরক্ষণ করা যায়। পরোক্ষ মাধ্যম হচ্ছে অনুবাদ সাহিত্য, যেটা ট্রান্সলেশন লিটারেচার। তার মধ্যে আমি নিজে যেটার সঙ্গে আমি পড়েছি সেটা হচ্ছে ভাষা সংসদ থেকে অনুবাদ সাহিত্য, যেটা 1975 সাল থেকে শ্রীমতী বিতস্তা ঘোষালের সম্পাদনায় শুরু হয়েছে। এবং সেখানে হয়তো আমি সেরমভাবে ভাষাকে, সেই ভাষার গল্প নেই, কিন্তু ভাষা থেকে যেহেতু অনুবাদ সাহিত্য, তার ফলত সেখানে বিভিন্ন ভাষার সেটা শুধুমাত্র কিন্তু ভারত নয়, যে সেখানে আসাম, মিজোরাম, তামিলনাড়ু, আবার ওদিকে বিশ্ব যখন হচ্ছে তখন বিশ্বায়নে যখন কানাডা অথবা ইউরোপের কোনো দেশ, তাদেরও কিন্তু গল্প উপন্যাস উঠে আসছে। আর এই ধরনের পত্রিকার হয়তো একটু প্রচার কম। আমি বলছি কেন পত্রিকার প্রচারের জন্য না, আমি বলছি যে এই যে ভাষাগুলো যখন আমরা জানতে পারছি, আমার যখন পড়তে গিয়ে মনে হয়েছিল যে অদ্ভুতভাবে জাতীয় সংহতির কিন্তু লক্ষ্যে কাজ করে চলেছে। কারণ আমরা একটা নির্দিষ্ট ভৌগোলিক অঞ্চলে বসে বা নির্দিষ্ট একটা ঘরানার সাহিত্য পড়ে আমাদের ভারতের অন্য কোথায় কি হচ্ছে, তারা কেমন ভাবছে, সেখানকার মানুষজন, সেটার খুব একটা টের পাওয়া যায় না, শুধু সংবাদের মধ্যে পাওয়া যায় না। কিন্তু যখন অনুবাদ সাহিত্য হয়ে আসছে, বা জ্যোতির্ময় দাস সম্পাদিত শ্রেষ্ঠ অনুবাদ গল্প পড়েছি, ভারতের শ্রেষ্ঠ ভারতীয় গল্প, তখন বোঝা যাচ্ছে যে একটা ভারতের মাল্টিকালচারাল এত দিক রয়েছে, সামাজিক দিক, অর্থনৈতিক দিক, বিভিন্ন প্রেক্ষাপট আলোচনা হচ্ছে। তো এটাকে আমি পরোক্ষ মাধ্যম বলতে পারি, যে সেখানে ভাষা না হলেও সেই ভাষা সংস্কৃতির মানুষ সম্পর্কে তার একটা উল্লেখ থাকছে। এবং হতে পারে যে এই গল্প উপন্যাস বা এইরকম সাহিত্যের সমাজের মাধ্যমে এসে অনেক মানুষ হয়তো সেই ভাষা শিখতে আগ্রহী হলেন, যাতে মূল ভাষার সাহিত্য তাদের পড়তে হলো। আর এইভাবেই ভাষা সঞ্চার হতে পারে, এক জিওগ্রাফিক্যাল ভৌগোলিক অংশ থেকে আরেক দিকে ভাষা ছড়িয়ে যেতে পারে। তো এরপর যেখানে আসি সেটা হচ্ছে অবশ্যই বেতারের ভূমিকা। বেতারে আমি নিজে আছি, তো এখানে বলতে পারি বেতার ভাষা কিন্তু ভাষা সংরক্ষণের ক্ষেত্রে খুব বড় একটা মাধ্যম। এখানে নাটক তো আছেই, বিভিন্ন নাটকের মাধ্যমে সংলাপ যেরকম ব্যবহার করা হয়, এছাড়াও বলা যেতে পারে সাঁওতালি অনুষ্ঠান হয় এখানে, সন্ধেবেলা প্রত্যেকদিন সাঁওতালি ভাষায় আলোচনা হয়, গান হয়। তাদের একটা গুরুত্বপূর্ণ ভূমিকাই হচ্ছে ভাষার ভারতীয় ভাষার বিভিন্ন দিকগুলোকে তুলে ধরা। সকালবেলা সংস্কৃত ভাষায় খবর পাঠ হয়। তো ভাষা সংরক্ষণের ক্ষেত্রে বেতার তো একটা খুব বড় ভূমিকা পালন করেছি। আর সঙ্গীতের ক্ষেত্রে বলবো যে ভাষা যেহেতু তার সঙ্গে জড়িয়ে আছে সঙ্গীত মানে গান, আর গান কিন্তু মানুষকে খুব খুব কাছে করে নিতে পারে। গানের লিরিক্স যে গীতি কবিতা তাকে কিন্তু ভাষা সংরক্ষণের খুব বড় মাধ্যম বলা যেতে পারে। মানে সেটা যখন জয়পুরে আছে তখন রাজস্থানী সঙ্গীত, আসামে গেলে আসামের চা বাগানের হতে সঙ্গীত, অথবা যে কোনো জায়গায় গেলে সেখানকার প্রান্তীয় মানে পাহাড়ে যখন গিয়েছি তখন দেখছি যে মানুষ সেখানকে নেপালি ভাষাতেই কথা হচ্ছে, সেখানকারই অনুষ্ঠান হচ্ছে, সেই ভাষায় কথাবার্তা হচ্ছে। তো বলাই যেতে পারে যে এক্ষেত্রে বলা যেতে পারে যে মানুষ কিন্তু বিশেষ করে যেটা বলা যায় বহুজন হিতায় বহুজন সুধায়, এখানকার মানুষজন মানে যারা রয়েছেন তারা মাটির সঙ্গে অনেক বেশি যুক্ত থাকতে চান। তাই জন্য তারা মাটির ভাষার বা আঞ্চলিক ভাষার স্পন্দনকে কিন্তু অনুভব করতে চান, যেটা আমার উত্তর ভারত মানে উত্তরবঙ্গে গিয়ে বেশি মনে হয়েছে যে সেখানে অনেক বেশি কিন্তু তাদের নিজস্ব ভাষাকে তারা অনেক বেশি গুরুত্ব দিয়েছে। এরপর যেটুকু বলা যায় সেটা হচ্ছে লোক উৎসব বা লোক সংস্কৃতি, তার মধ্যে গম্ভীরা গান, ভাদু গান, যেগুলো পশ্চিমবঙ্গের বিভিন্ন অঞ্চলেই রয়েছে, সেগুলোর মাধ্যমে ভাষা সংরক্ষণ হচ্ছে। তার মধ্যে পঞ্চানন বর্মা, তিনি রাজবংশী ভাষা আবার সংরক্ষণ করেছেন বিভিন্ন কবিতা লিখে। কিছুদিন আগে পদ্মশ্রী পুরস্কার প্রাপ্ত হয়েছেন গীতা বর্মন, তিনি ভাদু গানকে সংরক্ষণ করছেন লোকগীতির মাধ্যমে। আর আমরা জানি যে লোকগীতি বা লোকার মাধ্যমে ভাষা খুব তাড়াতাড়ি মানুষের মধ্যে ছড়িয়ে পড়তে পারে, কারণ সেই ভাষা মানুষের কানে কানে হয়, এক জায়গা থেকে এক প্রান্ত থেকে আরেক প্রান্তে ছড়িয়ে পড়ে। তাই গম্ভীরা বা ভাদু বা এই ধরনের লোকগীতি বা লোকমাধ্যম মানুষের ভাষা সংরক্ষণের ক্ষেত্রে খুব বড় একটা মাধ্যম। আর আরেক যেটা শেষ সেটা বলতে চাইবো যে বিভিন্ন ভ্লগ বা ভ্রমণমূলক ভিডিওর মাধ্যমে কিন্তু ভাষা সংরক্ষণ হচ্ছে। সেরকম টোটো জনজাতির বাসস্থল, আমরা জানি যে টোটো বলে জনজাতি আছে, সেটা পশ্চিমবঙ্গের শুধুমাত্র আলিপুরদুয়ারেই রয়েছে, মানে সেই অঞ্চলের বাইরে তাদের অস্তিত্ব নেই। তাদের ভাষা ইঙ্গো মঙ্গলয়েড গোষ্ঠী, এবং তারা কিন্তু মানুষকে জানাচ্ছেন যে সেখানে ভ্রমণ করতে বা আসতে তারা তাদের নিজস্ব ভাষা শেখাবেন। যেমন তার সেখানকার ট্যুর গাইড বলছেন যে ভিডিওতেই বলছেন টুং মিং ভরত টোটো, মানে আমার নাম ভরত টোটো, এরকম ছোট ছোট করে তিনি বলছেন যে আমাদের শুধুমাত্র পর্যটনের জন্যই না, আমরা এলে মানুষকে কিন্তু ভাষাও শেখাবো। তো এইভাবেই এই বিভিন্ন মাধ্যমগুলোর মধ্য দিয়েই আমার মনে হয় ভাষা সংরক্ষণ হচ্ছে, এবং আরও বেশি করে যদি আমরা সেগুলো জোর দিই তাহলে তার মাধ্যমে ভাষা সংরক্ষিত হবে। কারণ বলাই যায় যে ভাষা এমন কথা বলে বোঝে রে সকলে, যা মানুষের মাতৃভাষা, তাই বেশিরভাগ মানুষের ক্ষেত্রে কথ্য ভাষা হয়। আর যে ভাষায় মানুষ সুখ দুঃখের কথা, মানুষের নিজের কথা অনেক বেশি স্বতঃস্ফূর্ত বলতে পারে, তাই আমার মনে হয় মানুষের মাতৃভাষা আঞ্চলিক ভাষাকে অনেক এই এত বড় বড় ভাষার দাপটের মাঝখানেও সংরক্ষণ করার আরও বেশি করে দরকার, আর জার্নাল আর্কাইভ এইগুলোর মাধ্যমেও। আর এইভাবেই চলতে থাকুক। ধন্যবাদ, থ্যাংক ইউ। আমি আমার পেপারটা এখানে শেষ করছি।
Thank you. We will take the question after. The next paper reader is Anita Das. Title of her presentation is Storytelling as Decolonization, Interrogating the Rise of Indigenous Graphic Narratives. Anita is an independent researcher who has completed her BA and MA in Comparative Literature from Jadavpur University. Her research focus is, her area of researches are queer feminism, neurodiversity, anime, graphic novels, and web novels. She is a junior content researcher at G Entertainment Private Limited. Over to Anindita.
Slight change, there is a change in title, Storytelling as Survival, Interrogating the Rise of Indigenous Graphic Narrative.
The title of my paper is Storytelling as Survival, Interrogating the Rise of Indigenous Graphic Narratives. I would like to apologize for any of my mispronunciation of words. Graphic narratives may broadly be defined as pictorial narratives, sometimes with or without words, which serve to convey both simple and complex information in simple ways by perhaps defamiliarizing the readers and also providing an aesthetic effect. Sarah Henze, in A Necessary Antidote, Graphic Novels, Comics and Indigenous Writing, points out the recent boost of Indigenous graphic narratives in Canada and illuminates how non-Indigenous graphic narratives have contributed to the misrepresentation of the Indigenous Canadians, as further proven by Leslie Spillet's complaint against Tintin in America in Is Tintin in America Racist? For generating the racist colonial narrative that Indians are dangerous, Indians are to be feared, Indians are savages. Considering Louis Althusser's words, we are aware that any mode of artistic expression can be used as an ideological state apparatus to interpolate people into their subject positions. As one subject position determines the creation of their perceptions of the other as an object. Peter S. Lee in Race and Ethnicity has gone into great detail to portray the creation of subjects and objects by the Canadian government. As emphasized by Henze in her essay, and affirmed by authors like Michael Chiache and video game designers like Elizabeth Lapenzi, the didactic element of graphic narrative is very significant for the dissemination of counter-history by Indigenous Canadians to spread awareness about the multifarious truths, to combat misrepresentation and counter the dominant colonial singular narrative which the cishet white Canadian government has always regarded as the actual history of Canada. If an image is worth more than 1,000 words, imagine the potential of the union of an image with 1,000 words. This is the strength of the ninth art, a pedagogical opportunity for all education professionals, writes Lil Pinto in El Comic La Intermoralidad de una Oportunidad Pedagógica. The increasing popularity of graphic novels has transformed it into a powerful medium of expression. Once regarded as only a means of amusement, lacking literary insight and merit, graphic novels have evolved into a respected and well-regarded genre of literature, which is from all in his essay using graphic novels in the classroom, as he argues to prove the efficacy of graphic narratives as not only a medium of articulation, but also a pedagogical tool. Gorman claims that the contemporary and emerging generation of readers is more comfortable with non-text visual media and is therefore more at ease reading the combination of words and pictures utilized in the graphic style format to tell a story, in getting graphic, using graphic novels to promote literacy with preteens and teens. Patricia Rocamora Perez, Remedios Lopera Liria et al. Have also tried to scientifically prove the tremendous potential graphic narrative as a mode of articulation holds as a pedagogical tool in the graphic novel as an innovative teaching methodology in higher education, experienced in the psychotherapy degree program at the University of Almeria. Taking into cognizance all the above factors, one would attempt to analyze how graphic narratives lie simultaneously. Brianna Johnny, an Ojibwe from Russo River First Nation, Manitoba, influenced by the Redress Art Project in Winnipeg, wrote a letter to the Winnipeg Police Service beseeching them to take the investigation of missing Indigenous people more seriously, like they do when a non-Indigenous, especially a white person, goes missing. The letter is rendered into a graphic narrative called If I Go Missing. She first establishes her intersectionality, rejecting the singular subject position of the Indigenous Canadian woman that the dominant forces of power, the white Canadian government, imposes on women like her. Then she is further rejecting the negative essentializing characteristics accorded to her when she is asserting what characteristics the police should not associate with her even if her father is a convict. In the following panels, after emphasizing the predicaments her identity as an Indigenous woman blesses her with, assault, physical abuse, sexual abuse and such, even in the safe part of the city, even during daytime, a stark distinction between the treatment of a missing non-Indigenous person being associated with drug abuse as opposed to that of a missing Indigenous girl is portrayed. One can discern the discriminatory essentialized perceptions the police and media hold about the missing indigenous girl and their reluctance in investigating her disappearance based on those preconceived notions through the panels. Peter Isley has also stated that the inherently white and cishet patriarchal colonial state apparatus, even in the so-called post-colonial nation, discriminate against the marginalized by associating the genotypic characteristics of a person with their phenotypic qualities. One can rightfully assume that the girl's gender identity, along with her racial identity, together intensified the unjust treatment she faced from the media and the Winnipeg Police Service. Franz Fanon in Black Skin, White Mask comments that such a clear segregationist treatment by the legal system not only sows the seed of further marginalization and oppression based on otherization predicated upon socialized prejudices, but also breed self-hatred in the marginalized, as they start believing in those prejudices about themselves. This fact echoes Johnny's statement that the police's and media's unfair neglect of their cause and indigenous girls' life does not matter. Noura Mohammed and Dr. Monique Shoffin in Appropriation and Misrepresentation, Race Issues in Wow Comics issue number 15 enunciate the minimal representation ethnic minorities receive in the comics are characters that play the antagonist role of enemies with animalistic illustrations. The savage indigenous character is a perception that has been ingrained within Canadian mass media and continues to perpetuate racist ideologies. Such misrepresentation, due to historic reiteration, intensified by the didacticism of graphic narratives, as argued earlier, establish indigenous people as the other in Canada. Kumkum Sangari, in her Constellation of Violence, shows how the other radical incommunicability of pain, in Ellen Scurry's words, etches meanings to the body of a woman. In Beatrice Culliton's April Rain Tree, April is sexually violated, later humiliated in court, only because of her indigenous identity, and the derogatory signs like that of squaw are assigned to her body. Gail Green and Copilia Khan, in Feminist Scholarship and Social Construction of Women, expound upon the fact that mainstream historical discourses have always structurally ignored the voices of the marginalized, especially that of women, and therefore one needs to look for their voices in literature, art, and silences, which do not bear the where they have perpetrated immense violence on Indigenous Canadians into the spotlight. The mere fact that Brianna Johnny, at the age of only 14, had to write a letter to the police as recently as 2016 proves the terrible condition of Indigenous women in Canada even now. Moreover, the letter, having been illustrated only 5 years ago, serves to prove that the circumstances have not developed much lately either. But as Foucault says, even the oppressed have some agency at their disposal. So, a group of indigenous Canadian activists, writers, and artists, Brianna Johnny, her aunt Nahani Shinghus, Neil Shanagappo, participating in the illustration of such a poignant graphic novel, are using their agency to fight against the forces which oppress, suppress, and discriminate against them, desubjectifying themselves in the process. Nimki is a story of Kateri Akiwenzi Dam, has claimed to have written in honor of all the abused Indigenous children who became victims of the foster care system in Canada. The British colonizers used the residential schools and foster care system to completely shatter the Indigenous communities by butchering the nexus that exists between Indigenous children and their communities. Peter Isley's aforementioned essay talks at length about how they not only crushed the Indigenous people, but imposed intergenerational trauma which lingered till this day. The tremendous emotional stirring a novel like April Rain Tree caused by using many words to illuminate the horrors of the foster care system has been reinforced by this short graphic narrative as well through few words. The cover picture is of extreme significance here, because while foster care system thrived to isolate Indigenous Canadians from their communities by positing so many Indigenous people side by side, the artist may have attempted to heal and rebind the broken communities. The line of Indigenous people begins with an Indigenous girl, followed by Indigenous women, who are followed by obscure human-like figures. In the background, we see thunderbirds who are told to be protectors of the Anishinaabe people as stated in the story, and the turtle island from indigenous creation or origin stories which talk about a turtle that holds the world on its back. The turtle is said to support the world and is an icon of life itself. Turtle Island therefore speaks to various spiritual beliefs about creation, and for some, the um, hello. The turtle is said to support the world and is an icon of life itself. Turtle Island therefore speaks to various spiritual beliefs about creation, and for some, the turtle is marker of identity, culture, autonomy, and a deeply held respect for the environment. Moreover, a figure of a pregnant individual who appears like the galaxy is seen to be protected by the three thunderbirds. In a simple picture with only the title Nimki in capital letters, numerous stories are told. It is as if a message is being relayed that while the story is focalizing on the Anishinaabe woman, Nimki, she is part of a collective, and that collective shares a symbiotic relationship with nature. Nimki's story does not end with Nimki. It is passed down to her daughter, and the young girl's presence, along with the pregnant figure at the center, might be implying continuation of the community. With a simple picture, the indigenous knowledge system and art are being reclaimed, the fractured communities are healed, the broken bonds between the individual indigenous Canadians with their communities are being mended, and a protected future is being promised. These highlight the power of the visual, which can speak even without words. Afterwards, as we zoom into Nimki telling her story to her daughter in medias res, breaking the linearity of storytelling that the West European realist narrative mode propounded, especially in terms of history writing, not only is the indigenous act of storytelling being reclaimed with the promise of it continuing in the future, the combination of words with the images foreground the immense possibilities and potentialities of a new mode of expression when combined with the indigenous modes of articulation. Nimki, while telling her daughter the story of her mother, relays the story of indigenous mythical creatures like Mishi Baiju, the Thunderbirds, her father, the trauma of the residential school, the war, then shifts the focus to herself, and finally to the boy called Teddy, who was like her brother, to talk about the horrors of the foster care system where white families treated indigenous children inhumanly. She states how the 60s coup stole so many indigenous kids from their families that her mother kept her at home almost all the time in fear of losing her, resulting in the government ripping her away from her mother at the age of 6. She almost loses her name as the white people from foster homes refuse to call her Nimki, but she refuses to lactify herself and assimilate, holding on to the memories of her mother through her art and gardening. She finds family and community in Teddy, and through him, calling her Nimki, she finally properly reclaims her name. Their siblings-like relationship breaks the stereotypical white European idea of family predicated on blood. However, she ends up losing him too, as Teddy is implied to have sacrificed his life by committing suicide to protect Nimki after their failed attempt to escape from the tortures of the foster care system. Nevertheless, through Teddy regarding her as his hero, Nimki finds the strength to not only get through the following horrendous years in foster homes all alone, but to also build a family of her own and fight for her community. In the last panel, she is seen sitting on a truck with a Thunderbird t-shirt on alongside her community with 3 Thunderbirds flying over the sky as they oppose the government from taking more of their children away. Again, the realities of the indigenous Canadians, which the mainstream media and dominant forces of power do not allow to be disseminated, are relayed through the graphic narrative mode in a very complex yet simple and easily understandable way. Nimki, calling her sketches of the Thunderbirds as her rendition of the mythological creature, suggests that there are multiple renditions of the divine creature and opposes the Christian notion of a single unidimensional God. In the panels in which Nimki attempts to escape from the farm with Teddy, while their abusers are associated with Gijigokwe and Mishi Baiju, Nimki is associated with not only the Thunderbird, but the way she is shown to be rescuing Teddy, she seems to be resembling Superman, reminding us of the fact that Nimki and Teddy are colonized children. Therefore, we can perceive that Nimki is always shown in terms of her relationality. Her identity is intersectional, as she is not just an indigenous mother, she is a woman, an artist, a storyteller, a daughter, a member of her community, a sister, an activist, a victim of colonization, and the victim of foster care system, a wife, and most importantly, a fighter. The inherently cishet patriarchal white government would like to subjectify her as only an indigenous woman of Canada perhaps, with all the negative signs assigned to her. But by the authors asserting her intersectionality and by the readers also acknowledging it, Nimki is desubjectified. The choice of texts for this paper with Indigenous Canadian women as protagonists is a deliberate attempt to oppose the heteronormative patriarchal white Canadians' discriminatory treatment of these women. Lee Maracle's Bobby Lee, Indian Rebel, portrays how women and queer people being on the periphery in terms of both gender and sex are oppressed even by the racial community. Statistics also prove that Indigenous women are more likely to go missing than Indigenous men because they are murdered not only by other communities but by their own as well. As the complexity of marginalization and oppression in tandem with an individual's multiple identities is intensified when they are marginalized in terms of sex and gender as well, the theory of intersectionality becomes indispensable to analyze the text concerned. The choice of text of the same medium of graphic narratives should be instrumental in proving Sarah Henzie's claim about the necessity and success of graphic narrative mode as a new tool of the Canadian Indigenous knowledge system. The concerned texts defy the West European post-Enlightenment idea of history and non-fiction writing, which hinges upon the idea of sequential documentation of singular truths chronologically in the realist mode of narration, which is written in a rational, scientific, unbiased, referential language spoken by a universal subject. But one can never deny that the texts were able to present the realities, circumstances, and history of Indigenous Canadians, which are gleefully ignored by the mainstream historians. The images of abuse mixed with words may intensify the emotional stirrings more. Furthermore, as discussed in Henzie's essay and proven by Rocamora Perez's group's test, graphic narratives being more cognitively accessible to a greater number of people is an impeccable pedagogic tool. However, one would like to accentuate the fact that these graphic narratives are financially very difficult to access, especially by the people outside Canada, as compared to the mainstream white graphic narratives. Here we can observe the kind of discrimination the Indigenous authors of graphic narratives face. This is also an intersectional discrimination because while racism is creating problems in these narrative circulation, capitalism and European hegemony are also operative here because being dominant forces of power, they want to control the global readership into reading certain kind of narratives which are positive towards them only. The situation is more complicated, but the limitation of research resources will not allow one to delve into it. Ellen Showalter, in Towards a Feminist Poetics, uses the idea of gynocriticism to highlight the necessity of the existence of a kind of feminist readership who are always in search of the female voices that have been usurped by dominant male forces of history as an integral part of the feminist struggle. This helps in the process of disubjectification of women and their empowerment. Disregarding the chasm primarily created by the location-centric experiential differences, one has utilized the Rostov accessible by her identity intersection to try analyzing the concerned texts with the help of global scholarly interventions. As the political imperative of a queer feminist woman, one has attempted to participate in the larger feminist struggle by attempting to understand the epistemology of the standpoint of these Indigenous Canadian authors. One hopes to have achieved a cumulative standpoint in the process and have been able to offer feminist solidarity to them. By participating in such an analysis, one has also attempted to prove that the dominant forces of power are bound to fail in their process of subjectification of the oppressed, if only at least someone tries to understand the fact that identity is intersectional, the fact that the form of graphic narrative has been instrumental in gaining one's interest in this analysis, is very important. Shelley de Malin claims storytelling to be survival and a mode of protest. The rise of graphic narrative as a mode of storytelling has therefore clearly been proven itself to be pivotal. Thank you.
Um, anyway, say, in a way, Anindita actually talked about, like her presentation can be a case study, but
like a continuation of, say, the earlier discussion that in, say, the contemporary time, we do talk about, say, the literary texts. She is giving example from graphic narrative. She talked about intersectionality, class, gender, race, language, as well as, in a way, how these texts are addressing the history of colonialism, exploitation in, say, the any say, the situation, the identity crisis, or maybe identity formation, genocide, etc. And say, the interestingly, say, as a, again, say, as a student of literature, but I don't know much about Canadian literature, only the rudimentary preliminary things. But the interesting thing is structurally, there are, say, the possibilities when she is talking about the issues which these texts are discussing, that how they affect how they represent the different experiences. And when we do talk about, say, the otherness, alterity, margin, etc., and how they, as the title of the, say, the conference is talking about the national literature, quote unquote national literature, that when we are, say, as a student of comparative literature, we are continuously problematizing that notion of national literature, and how the several others, how the margins, how they are interacting with that quote unquote centered, and in a way, she is trying to address those issues. And probably a discerning student or of, say, the comparative literature will try to think about how these arguments can be related to comparative literature methodology more specifically, and how they are related to comparative literature practice. But now, see, the questions, comments.
ওভারঅল সমস্ত ক্ষেত্রকেই আমি আইডেন্টিফাই করতে চেয়েছি। দিস ইজ আমি প্রথমেই বলেছি এটা হচ্ছে পসিবিলিটিস, মানে এগুলো সব কিছুই আমাদের মধ্যে রয়েছে, মানে প্রত্যেকটা মিনস অ্যান্ড মিডিয়াম, জাস্ট সেগুলোকে যদি আমরা একটু এক্সপ্লোর করি তাহলে আমার মনে হয় যে ভাষাগুলো যেগুলো নিয়ে কথা বললাম, ইন্ডিজিনিয়াস ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ, আঞ্চলিক ভাষাগুলো, সেগুলো সংরক্ষণের ক্ষেত্রটা আরও অনেক বেশি বাড়তে পারে। কিন্তু চেষ্টাটা আর একটু করতে হবে, কারণ আমার মনে হয় আমাদের কাছে টুলস আছে, কিন্তু আমরা এখনও মেন ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ বা আমাদের প্রধান ভাষাগুলোর উপর অনেক বেশি জোর দিয়েছি, তার তুলনায় অনেক বেশি মানে খানিকটা অবহেলিত বা বঞ্চিত আছে এই সমস্ত আঞ্চলিক ভাষাগুলো। ওকে, okay, it's for all. It's for mainly who wants to learn the language, for future researchers, maybe many more years, after many more years, when people, even when the language doesn't exist, maybe exist but people don't use, even nowadays also, you know, like the other part of the India, they don't know that there is a language. I mean, there are so many people who wants to explore, they research, they write, and various kind of, it's not only that academician or someone, so this for them. And also it's for history now. I mean, we have to know it's our ethnicity, that there are so many languages that we don't know about. And I just came about know this Toto Janojati, that they are existing in Alipurduar, you know, in a area of Himalayan. So there are so many differences in languages. So this preservation for all the readers, mainly who are keen to know the yes. Hmm. Hmm. Okay.